Hey, arm wrestling related video. Other day I was in Reddit and there I stumbled upon arm historian who said that he doesn't think that arm wrestling is 4,000-year-old sport. And he pointed me to his video which name was The Real History of Arm Wrestling. And in this video, I will explain why I disagree with arm historian on the date of origin of arm wrestling. And my disagreement with arm historians, I can explain my disagreement with 2 points and 2 arguments, which I explain in this video. The first point, like his video starts, first point is that the obscurity, what is claimed in the video. His video starts with the wording that the history of modern arm wrestling.
Where and when did arm wrestling as we know it first appear in history?
And I think that defines his frames of arm wrestling kind of narrow. And if he then, from this definition of modern arm wrestling, which he says he is talking about, claims that the historians which talk about not modern arm wrestling, but proto arm wrestling, the prototype of arm wrestling. Modern historians are talking about the prototype of arm wrestling when they talk about the 4,000-year-old stuff. Arm historians is talking about modern arm wrestling. These are two different definitions. So, if arm historians in his video claims that the modern historians are wrong by dating the proto arm wrestling as 4,000-year-old sport, because in arm historians' definition, that's not arm wrestling that they see in those Egyptians' hieroglyphs. If arm historians claims that they are wrong because they disagree with his definition of modern arm wrestling, arm historians commit the fallacy of definist fallacy. The definist fallacy can be explained by choosing a definition for the thing you are arguing for so that it makes easier for you to win the argument. An example of definist fallacy could be that an atheist says to a theist, somebody who believes in God, that supernatural is defined as something which is impossible. And hence, because supernatural is impossible, it cannot be real. It cannot happen. And hence, supernatural doesn't exist. Because by definition, it's impossible. Do you see the logic, the fallacy in that? He chose a definition for supernatural himself that the people who believe in God, the theists, do not accept. And hence, by using his own definition, he made it easier for himself to come to the conclusions that he wanted. Similar is here, arm historians has chosen a definition for arm wrestling, which is that of a modern arm wrestling, where you have your elbow planted. And he using that definition to discredit the conclusions from the reasoning which flows from the definition for proto-arm wrestling. So, to clarify, modern historians think the upright wrestling position where arms are wrestling is proto-arm wrestling. And hence, those hieroglyphs, those 4,000-year-old hieroglyphs, are proto-arm wrestling, where there is upright wrestling. So that's their view. That's the academic view of the proto-arm wrestling. But the arm historian's fallacy is to superimpose to that reasoning his own definition from modern arm wrestling, that somehow this all has to agree with modern arm wrestling for it to be any type of arm wrestling. And hence these evidences which show upright wrestling are not good to conclude the origins from Egypt for the proto arm wrestling. So he is confusing between two definitions, that of a proto arm wrestling and that of a modern arm wrestling, where the elbow is planted. Okay, those are the 2 points. First point being, it is unclear to me, does the video claim that the modern historians are wrong? Second point, if the video concludes that they are wrong, then the video commits the definist fallacy. Okay, now to two arguments in support of the modern historian's interpretation of what should be the definition of arm wrestling when we are talking about the history of the sport. Should it be the definition for modern arm wrestling that the arm historian uses, or should it be the definition for proto arm wrestling which the historians use? Historians use a definition which we more focus on the wrestling in the word arm wrestling, whereas the arm historians focuses more on the word arm in the arm wrestling, as if arms which are wrestling, as if wrestling with arms. This is a lot more narrow definition arm historian uses than what the modern historian uses. And here are two arguments why I think this form of a definition is what we should accept. First argument is the argument for hallway arm wrestling. What is hallway arm wrestling? Okay, our hallway arm wrestling, as I define it in this video, is, as you might have seen many times, two arm wrestlers who are about to compete meet in a hallway in some hotel or something, and people are videotaping it and something, and they do this. They put their hand in the other person's shoulder and they do this standing up. I'm like this, and the other person has his hand on my shoulder and do this. According to our historian's narrow definition for arm wrestling, that wouldn't be defined as arm wrestling because the elbow is not planted. It's just the upright wrestling position. So, but the modern historians would successfully define that as some type of arm wrestling, and maybe would say that it's a between the upright wrestling position and the freedom arm wrestling, something like that. They would put it there, but they would successfully categorize it as some type of wrestling. Whereas the narrow definition arm historian uses wouldn't recognize that as arm wrestling at all, because the elbow is not planted. And hence, we can come to the conclusion that this, from the usefulness perspective, we can conclude that the arm historian's definition for what is arm wrestling as if proto arm wrestling, when we are talking about the history of arm wrestling, we shouldn't bring the question for modern arm wrestling. We should think about it from the proto arm wrestling perspective. From the broader spectrum, arm historians' narrow definition fails to define this as arm wrestling at all, even though we recognize that it is some type of arm wrestling. Everybody would agree, and that's why the top level arm wrestlers even today do it, because they try to test each other. It has something to do with arm wrestling, even though the elbow is not planted and you are just standing. So, point from that argument goes to the broader definition of arm wrestling when we are talking about the history of arm wrestling, because it's more useful in categorizing different types of arm wrestling. Second argument, I call this the argument from pole vault. The pole vault, the sport in which you have this pole and you're jumping over the thing and try to get higher. if we look at the history of pole vault, it's also the academics put it on in the Egypt, because in the Egypt there are hieroglyphs in which people are climbing on top of walls using a pole, like the pole would be a ladder. Okay, that might be a very far from pole vault as we know it today, but I think you would agree that that is some type of proto pole vault. And later on, after that, in the Middle Ages or something, not in the Middle Ages, but a little bit after that, there comes this canal jump. And I think it's even more ancient than in Europe. In India, people did it and stuff, where you used a pole to jump over water obstacles like canals and rivers or like something. You use the pole and you jump over it. And modern historians would say that okay, that's also some type of pole vaulting, proto pole vaulting, some type of prototype of the modern sport. But if we would use the logic for our historian, which uses a narrow definition when talking about the history of the sport, his definition would exclude all these of being any types of pole vaulting. Because he could just say arbitrarily that you have to have the bar. There has to be the bar there. And you have to measure how high did you go. And hence, from his reasoning, we would also give pole vaulting an estimate of age of something around pretty modern, because it's not very old, long time ago that people started to put the bar there and start jumping over that. So again, I think the narrow definition fails in the context of history and origins of sports, and hence it again strengthens the position of the mainstream definition of what should be considered as prototype of the sport, meaning that the definition needs to be broader. It cannot be defined by some arbitrary elbow on the table or there has to be a pole in the pole vault or arm wrestling elbow on the table. You, like, who decides what is the defining factor? And head is it's arbitrary. Why the elbow on the table? What if we would say you have to have these pads on the sides? And what is the trap use of the trap? You just would say, hey, arm wrestling started from the day that there was a trap in the hat. Like these are all arbitrary defining factors what arm wrestling is. And on top of that, it's irrelevant because it's talking about what is the modern sport, not is what is the prototype of the modern sport. Okay, so 2 points. The point for hallway arm wrestling, which is that the failure of the arm historian's definition to categorize that as arm wrestling is evidence for the superiority for the academic definition. And the second argument is that from the argument of pole vault, we can conclude that it makes no sense to talk about the origin of the sport and the prototypes of the sport if we use a narrow definition. We have to use a wider definition in which you have some kind of a ball in the case of pole vault, which you use to get over obstacles or move forward. Like it has to be pro, and hence we have to come from these points and these arguments. We have to come to the conclusion that the prototype of arm wrestling is the upright position of wrestling, which you are controlling somebody's arms in the upright position. And hence this, and because these Egyptians hieroglyphs depict that, they are evidence that arm wrestling is 4,000-year-old sport. Okay? And to claim that that is not so because those hieroglyphs do not show modern arm wrestling, that's a definist fallacy. You are using your definition for modern arm wrestling to to combat reasoning inside the definitions of proto-armors. Definist fallacy. If you are saying they're wrong, you are not doing a fallacy if you just say that this is a separate point. Let's look at the history of modern arm wrestling. There is history of proto arm wrestling, but let's look at the history of modern arm wrestling. In which case, these are separate things. And what is said in this doesn't doesn't say this is wrong. And what is said in this doesn't say in this is wrong. We can look separately the history of the modern arm wrestling and the history of the proto arm wrestling, the prototype of arm wrestling. Okay, so that was my video. 2 points and 2 arguments. And I don't mean to say that anything negative about our historians, about anything. This is solely about a topic, not about the person. Army historians is a vessel for this thought, and I'm addressing the thought, not the person. Okay? And if you think I'm wrong or I didn't say something which would be like important to say, or I misspoke, or I'm full of shit, or I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. And if you think I'm right, and I maybe didn't say something which was important, or otherwise you want to add something, tell it me in the comments. I do not delete any comments, and if you want to say anything, you can say it, and if you want to like the video, you like it. If you don't, you can dislike it and do whatever you want. Okay, that was the video, and this was the reason why I think his video on the arm wrestling history is wrong, and why I think arm wrestling is 4,000-year-old sport. And to recap why I think that, it is because there is a definist fallacy to use the definition from modern arm wrestling and apply it to the proto arm wrestling. If the video makes this logical fallacy, the conclusions don't follow. And then when we have these two definitions for what is arm wrestling, even though they don't compete, in the historical context, I think due to the two arguments I put forward, the argument for hallway arm wrestling and the usefulness of the proto arm wrestling, the historical definition, and due to the argument from pole vaulting, due to the more coherent understanding of history from the lens of the more broader definition, due to these two arguments, I think it's evident that the historical perspective of arm wrestling being 4,000-year-old sport is the right interpretation of the evidence. So that was the video, and bye.